Welcome to episode 3 of the How Good Is Your Overwatch League team series. This episode is going to be all about the Hangzhou Spark. To sum up how I'm kind of feeling about the Spark at a glance, they feel similar to last year look-wise. They're deep once again, but the question is going to be whether or not that actually means anything. Let's talk about it. The Hangzhou Spark were stuck in the void of inconsistency last year. They couldn't get much of anything going at all for the most part, which warranted a lot of roster changes, and if you ask me, all of their departures ended up being good choices. Coldest, Mika, Sominsu, and IDK were all thrown into free agency, and while some of those guys are definitely likable, this decision was rather painless. Sominsu saw minimal playtime anyway, as the things he specialized in were a bit too niche to get a lot of value, and when he did play, it was mostly on control maps. He was quite honestly wasting space for what could end up being a better DPS rotation. Then with the 3 support players, they definitely all had to go. After the MCD incident, the Spark had no promise left whatsoever at this position. IDK had run his course. He was a veteran and a true leader, but his level of play was never quite the same after his initial rookie campaign. He couldn't seem to keep up outside of Lucio metas, so not a big deal, even if it is a bit heartbreaking for the OG Spark fans. Then with Coldest and Mika, Hangzhou never really liked utilizing them. Despite being a high-level support line out of China back in the day, their skill set never seemed to translate into meaningful playtime. But yeah, that's basically it for all of the player departures. 4 players got dropped, and none of them were of major use to begin with. So on that end, the Spark did a good job. They freed up some easy space in the most painless way they could. And it's a good thing they did this too, because their off-season overhaul is somewhat underrated. The big thing to note is the addition of Super Rich and Irony at support. The Spark mostly had the same support rotation for the last 2 years, and it just wasn't working out. Utilizing entirely new faces could end up going a long way, and to make the situation even better, this new backline has decent upside. Super Rich likely would have been in the league earlier if he didn't dislike RUI's coaching style. He was the best main support Chinese contenders had to offer back in the day. As a member of the ever so dominant Team CC, him and his teammates were all the best without question. They crushed all the competition. But then, even in 2021, when Team CC became mostly Korean, Super Rich still held his own, language barrier and all. So not only is Super Rich skilled on a variety of characters, but he can thrive in mixed language settings, which is obviously pretty huge when considering that the Spark are basically half Korean, half Chinese. As for Irony, he's a Korean flex support out of the Sparks Academy team. Despite being maybe a bit lesser known, many casters and fans swear by this guy. Behind his prolific Ana and Zenyatta, Billy Gaming constantly finished high throughout all of the 2021 contenders year, and he too is already accustomed to playing in a mixed roster environment, so him and Super Rich should end up getting along. But also, he has previous synergy with 2 of the Spark's other additions at DPS, aka Pineapple and AlphaYi. These guys also serve as intriguing signings as we talk about them for a bit here, and it's for the simple fact that they provide exactly what the Spark needed. Some extra flexibility at DPS is something they desperately needed throughout most of last year. They were often forced to always run Architect, even in situations where he had to play characters he wasn't the best at, such as Tracer and Echo. By adding Pineapple and AlphaYi into the mix, the Spark have way more flexibility on what they can effectively run during a match. But also, it gives Architect the opportunity to focus more on the stuff he specializes in, making it a win-win situation. Pineapple and AlphaYi on paper have what it takes to greatly benefit the Hangzhou Spark as 2 promising prospects. Pineapple is a crazy explosive hit scan player first and foremost, but more importantly, he can play a mean Tracer, which is going to be huge. Now anytime the meta calls for any sort of Tracer, plus hit scan or general sniper, Shy will always have a lot less pressure on him to swap or to do most of the killing himself. Pineapple could low-key end up being huge, and is someone I advise you to watch carefully if he gets playtime. Don't be sleeping on AlphaYi either though, because he's a strong flex option who provides a nice boost, especially with the projectile roll. Like I said before, The Spark's Echo play definitely could have seen a lot more production outside of the time when Shy was playing her, since Architect just wasn't the greatest Echo player, but in general, alphaYi might end up becoming Architect's replacement as we move forward into the year. The fact of the matter is, Architect just hasn't been the same player the last couple of years. New blood might be exactly what the Spark needed, or at the very least they're going to have a deeper rotation. I really like what the Spark did at the damage role just because they still have Shy at the forefront, but he has better support now arguably. So that does it for your player changes, but that only tells half of the story, as the coaching changes are a huge part of this as well. The Spark did what they could to remove the old and make room for the new, as they got rid of Only Wish and U4, leaving them with only one coaching member left from last year's staff. And given the wacky results from last year, changes of this magnitude were absolutely necessary. No more temporary band-aids, it's time to start from scratch. But the question is, did the Spark make the right choices? The new staff members include Changgun at head coach, with Miro and Neko as new assistants. The Spark started fresh, which is nice, but most of these guys are maybe not all that trustworthy yet. Miro and Neko are great former players who might have some potential as coaches, but for the most part, at least at this level, they are unproven. And if that wasn't enough, Changgun in theory only gives the Spark more of what they had last year. Maybe he could remain the head coach of the team for more than a couple of months at a time, but in return, your game planning could be all over the place. This is a very risky pickup when looking at his history on the Seoul Dynasty. If he comes across the right meta, there might be a sudden playoff aspiration in the air, but for those times where everything isn't clicking, the Spark may be facing some ugly ups and downs. Spark fans better hope that a fresh start does this guy some good, because if not, this team could be in a world of trouble. What a messed up situation. The Spark finally end up addressing that coaching situation of theirs, but quite possibly through the biggest gamble of the entire season. That in itself should make the Spark a team of high interest. How about we move into a general evaluation of the roster? I'd say at the very least, they look better than last year, at least by a little bit. As previously mentioned, they made a lot of the right choices in my eyes, at least with their players, because for starters, they absolutely upgraded the DPS line just by adding more firepower. DPS is supposedly a big focal point of this upcoming game, so that's kind of what you're looking for. The Spark needed more flexibility so bad, since they practically had none of it last year. Shy is a superstar playmaker for sure, but there's only so much that one guy can do on his own. I have nothing but respect for Architect, but he's just not the answer all by himself these days. He can be a part of the solution, but his hero pool cannot cover everything. That's where alphaYi and Pineapple come in. They're young, mechanically gifted, they offer a different perspective of the game, and could encourage Architect to maybe step up his game. Between the three of those guys, surely at least one of them will be a somewhat consistent partner for Shy to piggyback off of, so he doesn't have to do everything all by himself. There is no guarantee whatsoever that the Spark's DPS line will turn into something really good, but there's a lot of upside and room for improvement as the season goes on, and I really like what they're doing. Any help at all is better than none, so expect to see at least a small increase in productivity. Then you have the supports, which also saw well-needed changes. Super Rich, in my opinion, is a great pickup, and I expect him to be reliable, but there might be more of a question mark surrounding Irony. He showed the right skill set in Chinese contenders, but we've heard that kind of story before, just to see players not really do much of anything. Look at Faraway 1987 as an example. Dude was a legend on Team CC, but was pretty much always on the sidelines last year after joining the Chengdu Hunters. Irony is not somebody who is guaranteed to work out, especially if the Spark are trying to be a true contender. However, the good news is that he very well might be enough to help the Spark compete for a playoff spot in general, because luckily for him, the APAC region isn't all that great with flex support talent these days. With the exception of Izayaki, he might have what it takes against just about any flex support in his region. We ultimately need to see evidence before making any actual judgments, but the Spark truly might have something with this brand new backline. And finally, we have the tank line, which actually didn't see any changes. They're still rocking with Guxue, Bernard, and Liege as a two-way player. I'd like to think that this tank line is around middle of the pack, or a bit above average depending on the meta. Guxue and Bernard are going to be the main guys most likely, and while they're both likable, neither one really screams top level tank currently. Guxue has kind of run his course in a similar way to Architect, where a bunch of the league has kind of just caught up to him skill-wise. He's still a great Winston and Rhine player, but the rest of his hero pool kind of leaves a bit to be desired. If the meta leans more towards Wrecking Ball, Orisa, or off-tank characters, he really may not be of much use. This genuinely might be his last year with the Spark if he doesn't regain some of that old form. Then we have Bernard, who is maybe more of an interesting case. He's shown decent flexibility throughout the years, and I truly do believe that he could be one of the guys to benefit from going 5v5. Throughout his career, his main tank partners have kind of struggled throughout various metas, but now that he's by himself, his play might end up standing out a bit more. Now it's a matter of if his general hero pool is up to par. His D.Va and his Sigma as well are respectable, but I'd like to see his Zarya improve. And what about anything he might have to play outside of the off-tanks? Does he have it in him to play a good Rhine, let's say? Bernard's a bright individual who genuinely still hasn't completely fulfilled his potential, but being a super flex might go beyond his talents. The Spark tanks are good, but I get the feeling there could be some holes in their game, which could be a major problem. Guxue and Bernard are both well proven, but recent years haven't been that kind to them. They're good, but not great. That's how I see them, and they honestly might end up becoming the biggest point of concern for this Spark team player-wise, even if they are the most proven historically. However, the players might end up being the least of their concerns because, again, that coaching staff has a ton to prove. A majority of that staff is inexperienced and unproven at the Overwatch League level. Miro and Neko are former players who certainly have the knowledge to help guide young players, but it might not mean much if they can't learn or if Changun can't lead them properly. Speaking of Changun, it's scary to think that this guy might have the most to prove despite being the person with the most experience on the coaching staff. Changun betrayed the trust of many Dynasty fans throughout his tenure due to questionable game planning, strange composition choices, and inconsistent adaptability. It doesn't feel right calling a multi-time champion the most questionable aspect of the team, but I think it might be the truth. His greatest success outside of the 2020 Miracle run came as an assistant coach rather than the true leader of the team. His track record as a head coach is up and down to say the least. The games that truly count have a tendency to not go in his favor. I really do not like how he approaches the game strategically. Maybe that's just the armchair analyst in me talking, but that's just how I feel when I watched the Dynasty play these last couple of years. Hopefully a fresh start can change that because God knows that him and the Spark desperately need it. If he uses a similar style to what we saw during the Seoul days, I fear that Hangzhou is going to see little improvement from a competitive standpoint. He has to earn back the trust that he once had. If he comes back a changed man, then maybe the Spark have what it takes to show noticeable improvement. But until the Spark show us evidence of consistency through their play, there's no logical reason to believe that Changun and the Spark can play significantly above average. Changun has proven that he can lead decent teams. Seoul Dynasty, for example, last year in 2021 had a pretty good record. But again, nobody cares about that kind of stuff if there's nothing to show for it, and that's where I fear the Spark are heading. My general feelings on the Spark are mixed. There's a lot to like, but it's accompanied by numerous concerns and potential weak points. I lack the confidence to say with certainty that this roster is going to thrive. So for that, my season expectations for the Hangzhou Spark go as follows. In the overall standings, they finish anywhere from 14th through 8th place. Their range is very large since everything about them is totally shrouded in mystery. They've got high upside to be really good or to flop hard at the same time. It goes both ways thanks to the uncertainties of their own team, plus what Overwatch 2 might bring. In the APAC region, they finish as high as 3rd if they fulfill their potential, but as low as 6th if concerns turn into actual problems. They could be a respectable APAC team this year, or they might just be lucky enough to win more games than they lose. As of right now though, there's only 2 APAC teams I could confidently say that they beat more often than not. Everybody else is basically a 50-50 or an L. The Spark may be one of the toughest teams to judge in 2022. They give off similar vibes to last year, but at the same time, their offseason was very productive. They made a lot of the changes and fixes that could lead to drastic improvement. I truly do not know how to feel. In my heart, they appear to be mid, and yet there is a ridiculous amount of potential on this roster that could change that instantly. If I were to summarize this group in one sentence, it would be that there's a lot to like and a lot to hate. Be sure to leave your own thoughts about the Spark though in the comments below so we can continue this discussion. And if you enjoyed the video and you want more team previews just like this, hitting like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.